Lean Leadership Podcast, episode 31.
You have to be willing to be inflexible on the principles and flexible on the methods.
This is the Lean Leadership Podcast. Equip yourself with the tools for success in your team's lean journey by learning from the world's top lean professionals. Listen at the risk of improving with your host, Chris Burnham.
Today's sponsor is Audible.com, who has more than 180,000 audiobooks and spoken word audio products. Get a free audiobook of your choice at www.audibletrial.com/Lean Leadership Podcast. Hello, Legion of Lean. Today's guest is the first part of a two-part series with Mike Orzin. Mike is founder and president of Mike Orzin and Associates, which emphasizes the development of people, business process capability, and leveraging information technology to drive a culture of operational excellence. Mike is also an adjunct professor with the Shingo Prize for Operational Excellence and is a faculty member of the Lean Enterprise Institute. Mike delivers a unique blend of Lean, Six Sigma, IT, and operations. He has been consulting and coaching for over 23 years. His career includes the successful application of Lean in many environments, including manufacturing and service, supply chain, IT, insurance, healthcare, aerospace, and food and beverage. He has been the plant manager of a medical implants facility and spearheaded strategic planning and project management office practices in several organizations. Mike's experience includes systems design, enterprise-wide project management, and large-scale rollout of lean initiatives in global companies as a guide and a coach. Mike's also a Shingo Award-winning co-author of Lean IT, Enabling and Sustaining Your Lean Enterprise. In this first part of our interview, Mike and I will talk about his personal development path and experiences with Lean, the role that meditation and mindfulness has played in his Lean journey success, the pitfalls of tool-based learning, and the infinite possibilities of personal and professional growth with Lean. We will release part 2 of this conversation next week, but for right now, without further ado, Mike Orzin. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you.
Well, I appreciate you being with us here today. And we touched a little bit on who you were in the intro, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, what you do, and how Lean or Six Sigma or continuous improvement is a part of your life?
Sure, Chris. My Lean journey started a little over 20 years ago. I was, of all things, a financial analyst for Cisco Food Services, and the phone rang, and somebody called and said, "We have a business re-engineering opportunity, and we think you might be the right person for this." And I had no idea what on earth they were talking about, but I was curious, and I went into the interview. And what they were calling business re-engineering, they were also calling world-class manufacturing. So this is before the term lean was even used in common language. And what they wanted to do was streamline their processes, remove waste, and increase flow. They weren't really using that terminology, but they had one small green book on the Toyota production system, and they had a gentleman who was willing to mentor me who had, I wouldn't say spent a lot of time with Toyota, but he had been to Toyota, he had worked with Toyota, and he was a very smart person. And he said, "I don't have time to do this, but if you're willing to try, I'll support you in the process." And we ended up taking a 13-week lead time. This is a medical implants facility, like a foundry. And we took that down to less than 3 weeks in about a year and a half. And I was hooked for life. I thought I had never, I thought this is like magic to me. I had never dreamed in my life that work could be so exciting, so rewarding, and so challenging all at the same time. And the owner of the company, it was a privately held company, was ready to move on, and he sold the business, walked away with a small fortune, and the new owners came in, and about 6 months later said, "Well, we're coming in with our own leadership team." And at that point, I was I had started as just a contractor, and this was now 5 years later, and I was the general manager, or I was the plant manager. So we were given our pink slip, and I said, "What do I do now? I'm not really qualified on paper to run a factory. I just got this opportunity from the owner. What do I do now? I know I'm in love with Lean. I'll be a Lean coach. I'll be a consultant." And I starved for a couple of years and just kept at it, and then started to find some clients and made some good relationships. And then you look up and it's been, I think, 23 years now. So that's kind of how I got into it. Thanks. It's been an incredible ride. And what I love about this work the most is every day is a learning opportunity. And that may sound a bit cliche, but any of your listeners who have worked with Lean know how real this is. So if you like to work on something that's very humbling, that keeps your feet on the ground, but it's also very challenging at the same time, there's nothing better. I think it's the most rewarding work. And, every day I feel blessed. And I don't like to use that word loosely, but I really feel blessed to have somehow ended up in this field.
That absolutely resonates with me, and I'm sure it resonates with a lot of listeners. The thing that I like the most about that story, Mike, is it started with a mentor. It started with somebody that had some knowledge and wanted to transfer that knowledge to you. And obviously you've gone on and touched so many other lives in your course of your 23-year career, and you've created your own learning and you've added to that. But essentially that leader planted a seed in your mind about what the possibilities were with continuous improvement. And it's led to a dramatic career that's impacted a whole lot of other people down the line. And I just want the listeners of the podcast to understand that either if they're in a position where they have an ability to be a mentor, or they're in a position where they need a mentor, that's how powerful that first teacher really is.
It really is. And I think that's so important. I worked at one very large company, and one of their C-level execs used the slogan, "Everyone shall have a coach and everyone shall be a coach." And although we never got to 100%, the aspiration, the objective was that you really do need to give back. I find I currently coach, 4 people right now. And some of these people are starting on their journey, and some are very far along in their careers. And I find it is the most rewarding work. And I often feel that the person doing the coaching gets more out of the exchange than the person being coached. And now, they don't feel that way. They always are the ones that say, "Thank you so much. This has been so helpful." But I always feel like, no, I think I got more out of the transaction than you did.
Well, that's great, Mike. And thank you for sharing that with us. It resonates with me, and I'm sure it resonates with a lot of the listeners of the podcast.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Well, before we get started in the interview, we always ask our guests to share with us a quote or a mantra from your favorite Lean leader. And if you could tell us what that is and why you chose that quote.
Sure. My favorite Lean leader is Shigeo Shingo. And if you're not familiar with Shigeo Shingo, you need to Google that name. But Shingo was an absolute genius who was the man behind the Toyota production system. We always hear about Teiichi Ono, but it was really Teiichi Ono working with Shingo, and Shingo worked with many other industries beyond Toyota and wrote, I want to say 7 or 8 books. But one of the quotes that I love from him, and there's many, is that people need to understand the why before they care about the what or the how. And I think we've all heard a version of that before, but I was surprised to discover that Shingo was talking about that in the 50s. We're talking 1958. So way ahead. I'm sure many people have paraphrased that. But and there was I know there was a French psychologist that spent his life studying the development of how children learn. And the whole idea was we really need to know so much more and understand and grasp the why before we care about anything else. But that's exactly the opposite of what we typically do in Lean. We start by teaching the tools, and we say, "This is Lean. Let me tell you what it is. Let me tell you about the techniques and the tools."
Yeah, now everybody put in, you're going to be on this 1-week Kaizen event, right?
You got it. Yeah. And the first thing we're going to do is talk about value streams and customer value and flow and pull and the cycle of perfection and mapping and A3 thinking. And all of those are wonderful concepts and tools. But until people really understand the why and identify with it in a meaningful way, they don't really care about anything else. At least they won't retain it. And I really like that quote.
Yeah, it lacks meaning and substance for the activity that's taking place.
Yes. Yeah, very true.
You touched on it a little bit earlier in your intro, but can you kind of tell us a story about why you chose this profession, kind of why you stuck with it when, clearly you're at a crossroads where you could have gone and tried to do another role as another leader in another plant or another facility.
Sure.
But you chose to chase the teacher role. Can you tell us why you did that?
Yeah, well, I find, and I think it's just my personal makeup, but I think everybody has a little bit of this inside of them. I find that personal learning and personal reflection leads to an incredible depth of experience. In other words, I felt like I was getting a lot more personal growth in personal challenge in trying to work with other people to develop them to understand lean thinking. And what I realized is the more I gave, the more I received. So it was also, I mentioned humility. Lean is such a humbling field that you're never an expert at anything. I always say if anyone says they're an expert in lean, you should probably run the other way. Because the greatest lean thinkers that I've had the privilege of working with, they don't think of themselves as experts. And I think we should kind of follow suit and realize, this is just such a big field. There's no end to it. It's uncharted waters in so many ways because you don't know what's around the corner. And so I think that's so important. And I absolutely got hooked on it when I realized that the more I learned, the less I really knew. And I like that feeling. It kept me very grounded. It gave me the feeling of an infinite possibilities for personal and professional growth. And I like, really, there's two sides of it. The side that I think most people are familiar with is the problem-solving side of lean. So, what do we do to remove waste and increase flow and enhance quality and delivery time, things like that. And that's fine. But the other side of it, which actually pulls me even more, is the people development side. And I think that's the side that many leaders do not fully grasp, nor do they know how to address it or take it on. And what I found is the more I worked on the people development side, the more I appreciated the continuous process improvement side, but also the more I realized that I couldn't get there without developing myself.
Well, Mike, do you think that's a reason that a lot of lean transformations or lean endeavors fail, is because they miss on that people development side?
That's completely the reason. As a matter of fact, I was that you kind of summed up my career experience in a couple of sentences, because starting off early on, I was involved in a lean transformation, and I felt like I knew what I was doing. I had been part of a very successful transformation that was well documented, and I felt like I got this. I know what to do now. And I was engaged with the company who wanted to take on a transformation in a slightly different way. And I was young, and I had a clear roadmap in my head, but I was too flexible on what I call principles. And I basically, the organization I was working with they said leadership was on board, but they were on board on, I would say, a very superficial level. They wanted to skip over the management layer and get down to the shop floor, both in the front office and in the factory, so they could start to realize the gains and returns of lean. They were very anxious to see ROI. And in my own mind, I knew that, no, we had to do this by the numbers. Leadership had to understand what they were getting into and make a time commitment. Management had to have their fears addressed, because management is typically squeezed out. They don't know what's going on, and they're very threatened, whether they admit it or not. And my mistake, of course, was I said, well, We're doing some of the things. It ought to work okay. And it didn't work. We had some localized successes, but we had nothing that would stick. And we certainly didn't have any kind of cultural transformation. So, and really what I learned from that was you have to be willing to be inflexible on the principles and flexible on the methods. But the one area that there is no compromise is on the principles that you're trying to bring about. And I think at the time, early in my career, I didn't have that. And because of that, one of the principles that I ignored or did not really have the courage to stand up and really move forward on is people development and engaging people, showing leaders how to lead with humility and how to bring respect into the workplace. And this is one of my favorite areas. The practice, we call it lead with respect. I put a workshop together around this concept of lead with respect to develop specific habits. What are the specific practices of leaders to demonstrate respect for the individual for the purpose of driving engagement, results, and accountability? And I knew this was true years ago, but I was willing to bargain it away just to get the engagement and work with the company. And of course, the learning was because I didn't engage the people, because particularly the management layer, because we didn't go deep enough on all three levels of leadership, management, and frontline associates, we didn't have a lasting transformation.
Yeah, I've always kind of looked for to create success whenever somebody wanted to endeavor in continuous improvement was to get the three levels of leadership aligned. Like, so if it's the shop floor, the manager, and a director, or if it's further up, further down, but to get those, when you can get three levels aligned, it has a tremendous amount of success versus just two. And usually I've found that it works both ways. If you have the two upper levels of management aligned and the person on the floor doesn't believe in it, it's not going to work, and vice versa. If the two levels on the floor are aligned and the director doesn't believe in it, it's going to have just as little success. So yeah, it makes sense. You have to get that alignment. And if you're going to realize and sustain the gains, if you're going to change the way you behave differently in your process, you also have to change the way that you lead. That needs to be different as well.
It really does. And again, Chris, I think you hit the nail on the head. One of the great pleasures that I've had is over the course of my career, I've been a meditator. I've been meditating for over 20 years on a daily basis. I don't think I've missed many days. And as I got into lean, I began to see that there had to be a link between awareness, mindfulness. That's really what the outcome of meditation is: conscious mindfulness and lean thinking. There was definitely a connection, because everywhere in lean, we're talking about engaging people to build effective work systems, problem solving, the plan, do, check, act learning cycle, respect for people, transparency, perseverance, creating alignment. All of those things require very high levels of presence, concentration, and reflection. And the more I began to view lean as an exercise in awareness around situations and organizational environments, the more I became open to seeing everything as an experiment. The more you see everything as an experiment, the more you become willing to let go of your bias, your opinions, and the need to be right. And for me, this attitude was so beneficial, because when I finally let go of that, I've got to be the person that has the answer. I've got to be in charge. I've got to, my concept of a leader was a person that was basically telling other people how to think and how to act. And that's not a lean leader at all.
I've started meditating last year in November, and
Excellent.
I use an app called Headspace on my phone.
Yeah, sure.
To help me.
With that.
And meditation it's a lot like lean. You are absolutely right, because at first you struggle with it daily. No matter how hard you try, it doesn't come easily. It does take practice. And I know for me personally, the act of pausing, reflecting, and kind of clearing out all the mental clutter that I have, that I acquire in my mind at the beginning of the day, it works well for me. So listeners of the podcast, if you're thinking about meditation and you're kind of tinkering with it, give it a try. Run the experiment and see what it does for you. It's paid off benefits for me personally.
That's good advice.
It's made me a better leader, and it's also made me a better husband and a better father. And it really touches all those areas of life.
It really does. It's the gift that keeps giving, to you personally and to everyone that you interact with.
I know that you've had a storied 23-year career with a lot of success, and you've been able to influence and impact a lot of businesses, a lot of lives, and a lot of individuals. But I imagine that there's been some pitfalls in there, and there's been some moments where maybe it didn't work out quite as well as you would expected, and maybe you're a little embarrassed about it, or there's a sinking spot in your stomach. Can you share with the listeners of our podcast kind of what your setback moment was with lean, and any mistakes that you went through that you want to share with them?
Well, and I have an endless list. Whenever I'm working with a client and talking about a concept or a behavior, I always like to share that I'm an expert at how not to do this, or I'll raise my hand and say guilty as described, because I think it's important to acknowledge that we learn best by stubbing our toe. We learn best by doing it wrong. Now, if you can avoid the mistake and get the learning by learning from another person, that's wonderful. You don't have to go through the pain or through the time that it takes to do that kind of learning. But I mentioned one, and that was the exclusion of the manager's layer. As a matter of fact, I've often described a transformation as a 3-layer cake, and you have the leaders, the managers, and the associates, or whatever words you happen to use. But as you mentioned before, those 3 layers all have to be on board, aligned, and have to be very clear on the why as well as the how and the what. But other mistakes that kind of come to the top of my recollection are basically leading with tools. Early on in my career, part of what I learned was let's create a team of people to make an improvement project and set up a improvement event or a Kaizen event. And we're going to spend the first half day to a day on generic Lean 101 training. We're going to teach them all the basic skills of Lean very quickly, touching on all the tools, and do a few exercises. And then we're going to value stream map. And then we'll get out of value stream mapping. We're going to come up with a series of recommendations. And at the end of 3 days, sometimes 4, our final quote outcome of all this work is going to be a list of recommendations, which we'll present at the report out. Leadership will say yay or nay, and then we walk out with a to-do list. And of course, this leads to very little, if anything. There's no real improvement, no real learning, certainly no experimentation. And it's become a pet peeve of mine. I call this fake lean. And the reason I call it fake lean is it reminds me so much of a veneer desk. If you buy a desk that has a oak veneer, it's not really a solid oak desk. But if you look at it, it looks pretty nice. But if you scrape just below the surface, you realize it's made of press board. So it's a fake oak desk. And this approach that I'm using, and again, I'm guilty as charged because I did this in the past thinking it was the right approach, and I'm totally convinced it's the wrong approach. It's fake because there is no people development. There's no real buy-in. There's no discovery. There's no validated learning. And we're not honoring the process of lean. And I like to use that term, honor the process. You have to honor the process. And I believe that the process of lean at the end of the day revolves around the scientific method. So most people are familiar with plan, do, check, adjust, but we really don't do a good job of honoring that process. And getting a bunch of people together in a room and teaching them random concepts about lean that they may or may not use, and then getting them walking out with everybody having the impression that lean is about value stream mapping for the purpose of creating a list of recommendations. Oh, boy, that's just way, way wrong. It's just off the track. And that's what I did. Yeah.
The number one question that I have learned here of late, and I've applied in the last several years of my career is, what can we do now? What can we go do now? Or what can we do today? And trying to run those small, fast, inexpensive adjustment type measurements or experiments to gain improvement, because that's the only way you're going to learn. I mean, movement is life, and you have to move in order to get at the next step.
Exactly. And I like to call that rapid cycle experiments. And if you can run an experiment in a day versus a week, you're ahead of the game. If you can run it in a half a day versus a full day, or an hour or 2 hours. But basically, we're getting people to think in much smaller bite-sized pieces. So a colleague of mine called this chunking. And the whole idea is we're going to take this and chunk it into smaller, digestible pieces that we can get our arms around. Now, what's amazing is most people look at that and say, but that's insignificant. If we take that small of a chunk, we're missing the whole picture. But Rome wasn't built in a day. And at first, really, we're doing two things. Yes, we're striving to make improvement, but even more importantly, we're laying the foundation for a new way of thinking for our people. And I think great leaders create a space for people to be comfortable with that new approach. Because if you think about it, most people's careers revolve around project-based change. So when we say we're going to do an improvement, or we're going to upgrade a software system, or we're going to release or implement a new policy, we think of it very much like a project. So we have a charter, we pull a team together, we have a committee, and we run through a series of steps through a schedule, and then we have some kind of big deliverable, call it the Big Bang. And at the end of it, we say, did it work or didn't it work? Well, this is the old style approach of a large batch. It's the equivalent of large batch thinking, and it's the antithesis of lean thinking. So when we come in and we say, everybody, the way we're used to running our business, the way that we think, in many cases, we're moving away from that. Well, people aren't naturally just going to let go and say, well, thanks for telling me. Now I'm ready to adopt a new way of thinking. We really need leadership that will model that thinking, reinforce that thinking. And the way you do that is you model and reinforce behavior. And if a leader doesn't know what that behavior looks like, or what those words look like that you wrap the behavior in, it's just theory. And unfortunately, theory has a very short half-life. Theory probably lasts a day or two, but after you've heard the speech or the workshop, it starts to fade very, very quickly.
Yeah, you've got to get the action piece. I think because of our PowerPoint society or the way that we run business now, we're really good on the plan part. The do part, okay, maybe a little bit. The check part, it depends on your maturity, but some folks are great at checking, some folks aren't. And then the adjustment phase is kind of like what do we do now? It's that's where I typically see folks going off the rails, or they'll get to plan and they'll make a great plan and then they won't take another step.
And we just get stuck in the planning loop. We've seen that before too. So a lot of this has to do, again, with an environment where people are very, very clear on purpose and feel a safety zone where it's okay to speak up and say, I'm not comfortable here. I was on a team once, and the team was floundering, and we were struggling. And one day we came into the meeting. I was the team facilitator. Everyone knew that we were struggling. It was a very complex problem. And we came in, and the leader of the team was waiting in the room for everybody and looked very somber, and he wasn't saying anything. He's normally a very upbeat individual, and we all could sense it. And we came in and we sat down, and the room was quiet, and he said, I have something I want to say. I don't know where we're going. I don't have an answer, and I don't know what to tell you guys. And that moment of vulnerability in that leader opened up the gates. It created a zone of safety, and people started to open up and say, I'm feeling the same way. I think we just need to look at this differently. What do we need to do? Well, at that point, people were connecting at a level that they hadn't done. Up until then, it was a lot of very, very smart people spending a lot of energy posturing and positioning instead of really focusing on the problem. And what that did was create an opening for me as the facilitator. And I went back to the principles of Lean and started to say, let's go back and really, really deeply focus on the process. What is happening right now? And then walking through the basic steps of plan, do, check, adjust, the team was able, once we were honoring the process, people had left their egos at the door, and people were willing to try something new and had kind of shrugged off the fear or the resistance of doing it. The team had a huge breakthrough. And that didn't come easy. It was a lot of work. But the catalyst of that breakthrough was the leader who basically showed vulnerability by explaining that he didn't have the answer and he was uncomfortable with the situation.
Yeah, and I want to kind of draw something out there for the listeners of the podcast is when you have the right people on a team and the right behaviors and attitudes, and you expose yourself in that way and you make yourself vulnerable, we all have different gifts and strengths and talents. And what naturally happens in a team is when somebody exposes a vulnerability, that's someone else's strength, and they'll fill in the gap for you, and it makes the team better. Mm-hmm. So great story there. Can you share with us a success story or maybe what the aha moment was for you on your Lean and continuous improvement journey?
Sure. Well, I think my biggest aha moment was this piece that came from meditation. And that is that the deepest level of learning comes from the practice of reflection. So reflection has been around in lean thinking for many, many years. It's called Hansei, Hansei. And if you Google Hansei or check your lean books, often it's described as critical reflection. And in some of the Japanese books, it's really a very personal thing where you're saying what went well, what went not so well, and was I at fault, and what do I need to do to make it better next time? And what I took away from that is this is not about shame. It's not about personal blame. It's not about putting yourself in a guilt trip. It's really about saying, what do I know? What did I see? And can I compare the evidence in front of me with what I know and what I expected, and process that in such a way to lead me to a deeper level of understanding? And for me, the aha moment was to realize that this entire practice that we might call lean or continuous improvement is a personal journey of learning. And the most essential piece of that journey is critical reflection, personal reflection. So we all have strengths and opportunities for growth. If you're human, that's the makeup that we're given. And we have different strengths. It's not about being solid in every single area. It's about knowing what you're good at, knowing where you need to grow, and just being consciously aware of your contribution and your impact of the team or to the team. And for me, the aha moment was this concept again of how can I bring mindfulness and lean thinking together? And for me, what I found is when I really started to let go of my biases and my opinions and the need to drive the conversation, my influence increased. It didn't decrease, it actually increased. And the attitude, if you can demonstrate this attitude, it's really contagious with others. So I believe it's the best form of lead by example that I've come across.
Mike, that's great insight, and I really appreciate you sharing that with the podcast audience. Well, do you have a lean or continuous improvement pet peeve or something you frequently see being applied or being done wrong? As you can tell, I really enjoyed my conversation with Mike. He has an infinite wealth of knowledge and experience with lean and its application in a wide variety of environments. We will release part 2 of our conversation next week. Show notes for this episode can be found at www.leanleadershippodcast.com. There you'll be able to find links to all of the things Mike and I discussed and how you can get in touch with them. If you are still listening this far into the episode, I want to talk to you. If you're struggling with something related to your lean journey, I would like to help you or connect you with someone who can help you. I'm offering a free 15-minute phone call with listeners of the podcast so that we can discuss whatever you need help with. Just go to www.leanleadershippodcast.com/call, and there you can get access to my schedule and set up a 15-minute call. We are a listener-driven show, so if you have feedback, questions for today's guest or another guest, or even suggestions on someone you would like for us to interview on the podcast, please go to www.leanleadershippodcast.com and click on the Please Share Your Feedback tab on the right margin. There you can leave us a message on SpeakPipe. We may even leave your message that you leave us on a future show. Thank you for listening. We hope you have a great week, and remember, progress over perfection.
Thanks for listening to the Lean Leadership Podcast with Chris Burnham. Get more info, resources, tools, or connect at leanleadershippodcast.com.